Welcome back to another episode of No Shame with Shane. I'm your host, Shane Fordham, with all the shameless sports takes. As always, I appreciate you for tuning in. Jumping right into it today. Jahan Dotson was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles from the Washington Commanders in exchange for a third round and 2 seventh-round draft picks for this upcoming draft in 2025. And I got to say, this move with the addition of Jahan Dotson, makes the Eagles undoubtedly the best and most potent offense in the entire NFL. Having Jahan Dotson eliminates the ability for defenses to play man coverage against the Eagles. A.J. Brown is able to beat a starting corner one-on-one. Devontae Smith is able to beat a starting corner in a one-on-one matchup. Jahan Dotson is able to beat a walk down nickel DB in a one-on-one situation. So Saquon Barkley is able to beat a linebacker in a one-on-one situation. Most linebackers aren't able to cover Saquon Barkley. And then you also got to worry about Dallas Goedert. So having Jahan Dotson makes the Eagles even more of a Super Bowl offense. Just adding another weapon to the arsenal that Howie Roseman has surrounded Jalen Hurts with. But this is interesting because even with that, Jahan Dotson doesn't even need to be great this season in order for the Eagles to be a Super Bowl offense. Jahan Dotson could simply put up the same numbers he did last year and his rookie season, and the Eagles would still be the best offense in the league. Jahan Dotson could have a Torrey Smith-like year for the Eagles, where the Eagles could still be a Super Bowl team, not just a Super Bowl team, but a Super Bowl winning team this coming season. Torrey Smith in 2017, when the Eagles went to the Super Bowl with Carson Wentz, with Nick Foles, with that group, Torrey Smith only had about 430 receiving yards with 2 touchdowns total on the entire regular season. But even though his regular season was underwhelming, he was still a reliable option who the Eagles could count on when they needed a play. He was a deep threat guy that would be able to stretch a defense. Jahan Dotson could very easily have a Torrey Smith year this year, and the Eagles would still be a championship team. But with that being said, Jahan Dotson is definitely in for a significantly better season this year than what he did last year. Torrey Smith in 2017 was almost 30 years old. Jahan Dotson is entering a Super Bowl contending offense as a 24-year-old who has already shown glimpses and potential to be a really good number 2 option on a team. The best quarterback that Jahan Dotson has ever played with is Sam Howell, who at one point last season was top 5 in passing yards during the regular season. Other than that, his other main quarterback was Carson Wentz, a turnover machine who only threw for about 1,700 yards total that season in 2022, Jahan Dotson's rookie year. So Jahan Dotson being able to put up 500 yards in Washington is more impressive than you might think, because Jahan Dotson putting up 500 yards with quarterbacks like Sam Howell, Carson Wentz, Taylor Heineke, Jacoby Brissett could easily be an 800 to 900 receiving yard season playing with a quarterback of Jalen Hurts' caliber. Like, Jahan Dotson makes this Eagles offense so scary. I mean, the entire NFC should be worried at this point. Having Jahan Dotson within this offense makes the Eagles undoubtedly the best offense in the entire NFL, especially with the 49ers. In the 49ers regard, Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams not being finalized in terms of their contracts, with their futures still being uncertain in San Francisco. The Eagles have solidified, at least on paper, the best offense in the NFL and the most versatile offense in the NFL, at least until Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams make things final with their upcoming contract negotiations. So I will say, I mean, this is really just Howie being Howie again. I mean, Howie Roseman has made the best offseason moves this season out of any other GM in the NFL. The Eagles have have had really the best offseason out of any other team because of the moves that Howie has been making, putting Jalen Hurts and this team in a position to go to another Super Bowl, but not just go to a Super Bowl, but to win the Super Bowl this time, to get the job done, not just to get there, but to get the job done. I will say that these moves by Howie Roseman, it puts two people specifically under more pressure as we step closer towards the regular season. Two guys who are going to be under pressure this season for two different reasons. One being Nick Sirianni and one being Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts has to prove that his best was not a fluke, whereas Nick Sirianni has to prove that he even has a quote unquote best when talking about performance and season outing. Jalen Hurts has to prove that the 2022 Super Bowl season was the reality and not a fluke. He has to prove that the 2023 season of last year was a fluke and not the reality. Because in reality, I believe Jalen Hurts has the intangibles, capabilities, and the skills of a top 5 quarterback, top 10 quarterback at least. Last season, that 2023 season knocked Jalen Hurts off of most people's top 10 quarterback list going into this regular season. They blame him for the collapse, having one of the most even though he was in one of the most predictable offense of that season, they blame him for 5 straight losses at the end of the season, losing in the wild card round. He has to prove that what we saw from him in 2022 is the real Jalen and not what we saw in 2023. But even with that being said, in 2023, while, like I said, playing in what was the most predictable offense in the league that year, he still had more passing yards than he did in 2022, which, as we remember, in 2022, he was the runner-up for MVP behind Patrick Mahomes, the best player in the entire NFL. Last season, he had more passing yards than he did in the 2022 season, putting up about 3,800 passing yards. So even with that, Jalen Hurts still has shown the ability to produce. Jalen Hurts in his MVP season, being top 10 in passing yards, leading the league in terms of rushing yards from a QB, being a guy who can lead an offense, orchestrate an offense, to be a leader of men. Jalen Hurts has to show that 2022 Jalen Hurts was the reality and not the fluke, that his best was not a one-time thing. Nick Sirianni, however, has to show that he is even capable of having a productive season. Nick Sirianni hasn't shown to do anything particularly well within a team. If you look at that Super Bowl season, which was Nick Sirianni's best season on paper, Shane Steichen ran the offense, Jonathan Gannon ran the defense, and Nick Sirianni has never been in a position where he has been able to show that he is a good drafter. He hasn't shown to be a particularly good leader. If we're thinking about quality coaches usually have at least one thing that they do particularly well. Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, LaFleur have all proven to be offensive wizards. Shane Steichen has proven to be an offensive strategic mind. DeMeco Ryans and Jonathan Gannon have proven to be to be strategic defensive minds, have shown to have the ability to orchestrate a defense. Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh usually have good to great defenses just about every season. Doug Peterson, another guy who is shown to be an offensive wizard. Kyle Shanahan hasn't shown the ability to be able to be capable of calling an offense or orchestrating a defense. He didn't show that last year when coordinators Ben Johnson and Sean Desai struggled, causing the collapse of the Eagles. He didn't step in and he didn't show the ability to step in and be able to make those calls himself. We know Howie Roseman handles the drafting for the Eagles. So it's not like he's shown the ability to be able to recruit significantly well. And he hasn't particularly shown the ability to be a good leader of men. So the question is, if Nick Sirianni hasn't shown to be capable of calling an offense, hasn't shown the ability to be able to handle a defense, hasn't been in a position where he has had to draft well, hasn't shown the ability to be a particularly good leader, then what exactly does he have to offer to a team, to this team specifically, but to a team in general? And that is the question that Nick Sirianni is going to have to answer this upcoming season. So two guys who are going to be under pressure this year, but for two very, very different reasons. Nick Sirianni having to prove who he is, and Jalen Hurts having to prove that his best is not behind him. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out this year in what will be I'm predicting a Super Bowl year for this Eagles team. But that is all for this edition of No Shame with Shane. If you haven't already, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of our social media platforms. And I will be back later for more Shameless Takes.